Okay, so then let's start. Raza, I will just give a few technical remarks before passing the floor to yourself, and then Luke will say some introductory remarks. Great. So welcome everybody to this webinar on overcoming the impact of COVID-19 on the employment of persons with disabilities. The webinar will be recorded and will be made available after the event. Your microphone will be muted to ensure that the session is of sufficient quality. We will try and make sure you can ask some questions. So we will be monitoring the chat box for the Zero project. But if you wish to activate closed captioning, please do so at the bottom of your screen. International Sign Language interpretation is also available, and we will make sure that the interpreters are spotlighted throughout the event. I will now pass the floor to Raza for some introductory remarks from the Zero project.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Zero Project community. It's a real pleasure to have so many of you with us at this year's Zero Project conference. With over 4,000 participants online, this year's virtual conference has become a truly global gathering space for those committed to disability inclusion. With over 4,000 participants from all over the world, it is easy to forget to mention the backbone of global gatherings like these, namely trusted partners such as ESPD. Thank you to ESPD for putting together this valuable partner channel session. Therefore, without further ado, I wish you all well and look forward to seeing you online.
Thank you very much, Raza and the Zero Project for allowing us to have this session. Now I will pass the floor to Luke Zelderloo, who is Secretary General of ESPD. Luke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Raza. Indeed, the cooperation between the Zero Project and ESPD is a cooperation which proved to be very fruitful and very positive. So again, this year, in completely different circumstances, we are very happy to be able to work with the colleagues of the Zero Project. Dear participants, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. You are from all over the globe. Welcome at this webinar. I am, as said by the policy manager of ESPD, indeed Secretary General of ESPD, but I'm also very proud ambassador of the Zero Project. Welcome at this webinar organized by ESPD, the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. We represent around 17,000 organizations active on the European continent. And many of these organizations work in the employment field, provide supported employment training, vocational training, and all kinds of pathways into employment. We organized this webinar in close cooperation with the Zero Project. And the Zero Project, dear participants, you all know that, has a very clear and a very high ambition. Zero exclusion, zero segregation of persons with disabilities. And during this webinar, we'll discuss this and the impact of COVID-19 on the employment and job opportunities for persons with disabilities. And we know that the impact is huge. Persons with disabilities lost jobs more than their non-disabled peers. And there seem to be no new job opportunities out there for people with support needs. Persons with disabilities, grassroots organizations, job centers, public employment agencies, supported employment agencies, social cooperatives, and social enterprises all report the same. Many lost their job and there are no new jobs made available. And it will remain difficult for the coming 2-3 years. Unemployment, poverty, and exclusion will be the direct effect of COVID-19 on many persons with support needs, persons with disabilities. And we all know that next to unemployment, there are also other very negative effects and impacts of this COVID-19 crisis. But here and today, we focus on employment. The coming hour, we will discuss this challenging situation from different perspectives. And we will also share with you some data, because we did a bit of research around the impact of COVID-19 on the employment of persons with disabilities. I wish you a very interesting and, to the extent that it is possible, interactive webinar. And now I hand over to the policy manager of ESPD, Thomas Bignell, who will moderate this session. Thomas, we're all yours.
Thank you very much, Luc, for presenting what is becoming more and more obvious, that the context is extremely difficult. But the focus of this webinar will try and be a bit more positive, and we'll try and examine how we can together in different ways overcome the current situation, how we can create job opportunities for people with disabilities, even in the current context, but also to make sure that we are supported sufficiently by policymakers, by public authorities in doing so, because without such intervention, it may be very difficult to do so. So that's the general context that we are discussing today. We have many different panelists coming from different perspectives. We have researchers with Sigrid Hunt. We have employers for example, with Sabina Lobato from Fondation Onte, from Aurélie Smets from Emino, who work with employers and people with disabilities, and we have Catherine Volker, who works in Germany in the sheltered workshops sector. And we also have Jürgen Menz from the International Labour Organization to present the work that they do together with businesses. And last but not least, we will have Barbara Macondes, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, from Inclusion Europe, to bring in the perspective of people with learning disabilities and their families. Many different perspectives, but hopefully we can try and bring together some common messages and discuss this today. So I will start now with the first round of questions for everybody, and then we will then start a debate or discussion. So Sigrid Hunt, you are a researcher in Frankfurt, and you've been doing some research for ESPD on the short-term impact of COVID in the field of disability. What are the results of your first research, Sigrid?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. We sought to understand the initial effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on social support services for disabilities in 5 European countries. And the expert interview showed us that the supported forms of employment of persons with disabilities were strongly affected. Often they are employed in areas that experienced closures during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as catering services or laundry services for hotels. Also in production, the production chains were disrupted, orders were cancelled, or not all components arrived in time. Additionally, service and production processes were just stopped because the sheltered workshops or social economy enterprises were closed. There was a fear that persons with disabilities would contract COVID-19 at workplace, and it would cause the virus to spread also in care homes. So naturally, this caused loss of income for persons with disabilities. In some countries, their temporary unemployment or reduced hours work was recompensed on similar terms as for persons participating in the regular labour market. For example, in Spain, they could participate in the temporary labour adjustment plan. In Germany, however, this was not the case for a large share of employees with disabilities. Those working in sheltered workshops could not apply for reduced hours work compensation. According to an expert, it is because the employment of persons with disabilities is still not regulated in a completely inclusive manner, and there is an overlapping of the employment law and social law. So if for any reason this special form of employment fails, it is not relevant anymore that this person participated in the labour market, but that they have a disability. In a situation where employment fallouts are of a systemic nature, it becomes an equal opportunities issue that definitely needs to be addressed. We also need to take into account that the employment of persons with disabilities is a multi-layered issue. On the one hand, it is about performing tasks, creating value added, and being paid for this. On the other hand, it has a social and personal growth dimension. Employment is also about enabling persons with disabilities to widen their social contacts, experience vocational guidance and training at workplace, as well as build up independence and autonomy in their everyday life. To that end, employment of persons with disabilities involves a service element that enables all this to take place. It holds together 3 lines of activity: the work process itself, with its tasks and remuneration, the vocational training, and the social component. During COVID-19, the authorities and operators of employment sites for persons with disabilities had to disentangle these activities that under the usual circumstances were working together. However, it was difficult to address these dimensions separately. They were co-functioning in the employment system, but it was very hard to maintain the similar kind of coherence in fragmented settings. Let me give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. There were attempts to redeploy the staff of sheltered workshops to residential care homes. There, they tried to offer alternative activities that help persons with disabilities to structure their day, even though in a different manner. Or they even tried to move production activities to these new sites. Also, vocational training offers were digitalized, but the providers lacked clear guidelines and experience with designing those very specific learning formats. For the social aspect, it was reported that persons with disabilities missed their usual settings and colleagues, and it was also more difficult to support them in their autonomy. So we see that the issue of employment during the COVID-19 pandemic points at many difficulties and throws up many fundamental questions. Therefore, it is important to look at the issue in more detail, and we're going to carry out another piece of research with the ASBD for 10 European countries in the next couple of months. So I would be delighted to share the results with you in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sigrid, for that first overview and then showing the first results. Highlighting I think first of all the complex nature of the employment, let's say, industry or sector around people with disabilities and how it affects it in different ways. Now we will speak to the organization which I think probably in the world is the biggest employer of persons with disabilities, globally speaking, or close to that. The Fundación ONCE in Spain employs thousands and thousands of people. But it's also a network representing people with disabilities themselves. They have that dual role to a certain extent. Sabina, given your quite unique perspective on this topic, how do you see the employment prospects of people with disabilities in the coming months and years? And how can we support your organization, ONCE, to employ more people with disabilities?
Okay, thank you very much, Thomas, for the invitation to be in this panel in the Zero Project. It is really strange not being in Vienna those days, but things are like we have to face this situation. So happy to be here. First of all, I think the protection measures that different governments have put in place to avoid avoid job destruction has been very important, but prospects in any case, I should say that that are really bad. In terms of talking about Spain, the statistics from the public employment services show that the number of contracts for persons with disabilities decreased 32% in 2020 compared to the 29% that has been the general contracts decline. And this decline is remarkable, taking into account, as I say, the protection measure that the government put in place, that now more than 750,000 persons are still under this protection. Not only persons with disabilities, but all. And this figure reached 3.5 million in the case of Spain in the month of April last year. Unfortunately, our economy is very dependent on services and tourism, and that have been very highly impacted by the pandemic. And think, for instance, in regions like Baleares, where 80% of the economy depends in some ways on tourism. We have a strong position on the hotel sector. So we've been also very impacted by this situation. And also in Spain, the impact has been very different depending on the economic structures of the different regions. So like the most dependent on tourism have been really very hugely affected, and perhaps regions like Madrid or the Basque Country are less impacted. In the months to come, I think the employment recovery will be slower than we expected, and the big non-answered question is the significance of the impact that the more structural transformations that have come with the pandemic will have in terms of employment that will not be recovered. Think, for instance, in the increase of telework that goes to less business travels, and the impact in all the surrounding sectors around traveling. So this is the not answered question in terms of the recovery that we will need to go more in deep, and I don't think that no one has the answer to that. In terms of the measures, I think the protection that I say measures should be maintained in Spain has been postponed until 31st of May. Another measure is crucial to guarantee and strengthen the financial framework that supports work inclusion social enterprises like the ones that we have. We have seen in the past crisis that this type of employers, in the case of Spain, the so-called special employment centers that employ around 30% of the total person with disabilities employed, are crucial to maintain jobs. So we need to maintain and strengthen this financial framework for that type of social companies. And also very important that the recovery plans in each country consider special measures for the most vulnerable groups, in our case, persons with disabilities. First of all, to fight the digital gap in persons with disabilities that generate and also to generate digital and technological talent for the new and most demanded professional profiles. We have put in place 2 years ago a program called Por Talento Digital, that is something like for digital talent that allow us to train mainly in an online format more than 3,500 persons with disabilities last year, both in digital skills, but also to perform as programmers or quality and test experts for the gaming industry, for instance, and other profiles. Also, it's crucial to support digital transformation for work inclusion social enterprises, as I said, that have less access to finance for this transformation. Another thing very important is the field of job opportunities linked to the development of the Green Deal and the more sustainable low carbon economy that governments see as part of the transformative recovery. And we will need to prioritize persons with disabilities in terms of training opportunities and in terms of job opportunities. And dealing with the support to digital transformation, I want to highlight also the issue of accessibility. Digital transformation need to be accessible, or otherwise many people with disabilities will not have the opportunity to engage in this field of job opportunities. And I will conclude saying that disability should be a relevant part of the recovery agenda as a transversal issue, and also a strong part of the employer's agenda, which is really important.
Thank you very much, Sabina, for giving a very solid overview of the situation. And of course, you're not just, let's say, an employer of persons with disabilities. You work as an organization within sectors which have been highly affected by the pandemic, and therefore looking at it from that angle is especially relevant. You highlight, I think, important points, for example, financial support to the work integration and social enterprises, having the right frameworks in place to support that process, making sure people with disabilities have the right skills. It's important you have a program going on there which has been very effective. And of course, a lot of the recovery will be focused around two main, let's say, transformations, both the digital transformations, but also the Green Deal, the climate-related and energy-related measures. And it's important that we make sure that these two transformations are inclusive for people with disabilities, but also that we allow that people with disabilities have work opportunities within these transformations, and that we can't separate the two. So thank you for that, Sabina. Very useful. I'll come back with some questions later.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have a question to Emino, and Emino is a supported employment agency in Flanders. Aurélie, welcome. So you work with, as a supported employment agency, with both workers with disabilities, but also employers. What do you see as the main challenges, but also the main needs that you have to help create more opportunities for people in the months to come?
Hi, everyone. I would say thank you for this opportunity to be invited to this panel first. We actually see three big challenges for the next months or even years. First of all, until recently, we actually had a positive evolution in the employment of the most vulnerable people, for example, people with disabilities, people with health problems, but also people with low level of education, because of labor market tightness, which provided more opportunities for these people. But this favorable development seems to have stagnated due to the negative impact of the COVID-19 measures. So now the most vulnerable groups on the labor market, and especially people with a disability, are having once again experiencing difficulties in finding or retaining jobs, especially because it's been said by Sabina as well. These people mainly work in sectors that are affected proportionally more by the COVID-19 measures, for example, retail or production or manual labor. So as a result, this group has been hit even harder by the pandemic. And we see that this has an impact on all areas of their lives. It has a financial impact, it has a psychological impact, and also has a social impact. So in order to keep these people motivated to go on the labor market, we need employers who remain committed to providing opportunities. We believe that financial incentives from governments can help in this objective. And in addition, we must make the best possible use of existing measures related to supported employment or job coaching, where the presence of coaches in the workplace is crucial. By applying supported employment, coaches can support both the person with a disability and the employer, and that can take some of the pressure off that COVID-19 measures have created. And in addition to that, there is this existing group of people with disabilities who have it harder now on the labor market, but there's also the group of people, ex-COVID-19 patients, who face permanent health problems, physical or psychological, because they had the illness. And this too has an impact on their ability to function in professional capacity. So they too will need support from coaches, job coaches or SOM coaches, if they are to return to work after that period of illness. So not only has a group of people with disabilities been hit hard by the COVID pandemic, the group has also enlarged because of COVID. And to successfully reintegrate this group, we must start preparing return to work as soon as possible. We should focus more on return to work coaches who can offer support. We need return to work programs that concentrate on what still can be done instead of abilities people might have lost because of their illness. And this is a mind shift we need in general. And for an employer, a return to work premium maybe could be considered to facilitate this restart and compensate for the risk of a relapse, because we know that employers often want to give their employees a chance to return to work, but they're also afraid when people would relapse, what the financial repercussions could be, or what the repercussions could be on the team, the colleagues. So we have to take that into consideration as well. And again, already a lot of measures exist, existing support opportunities, be it financial like premiums, but also progressive return to work or specialized job coaching could be better publicized, because there is a lot, but it's often not known by employers or people with disabilities who are looking for a job or are trying to retain their job. And then finally, the third challenge, the COVID-19 crisis, has been said before as well. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted the digital divide. Digitization has gained momentum, and many courses, trainings have now been digitized. Many services are now offered online, sometimes even solely online. And people with disabilities already previously, pre-COVID, participated less in training and further education. And now that everything is organized online, they experience even greater barriers to participate in training. So while government and policy is really pushing lifelong learning into the spotlight, a large group of people are excluded from it because they experience all kinds of obstacles and barriers. First and foremost, access to the internet or computers. A lot of people in poverty and people with disabilities are often people in poverty as well. They don't have access to the internet. They don't have an own computer. So the first step is to make sure that these things are available to them. And in addition to that, they often lack basic digital skills. You cannot expect someone to follow a training completely online if they don't even know how to open Internet Explorer, or if they cannot check their mails. So we need a very low threshold training for basic digital skills first, and only when that's mastered, only then other skills can be developed digitally. So we believe that for the most vulnerable group, and in this case for us, it's people with a disability or people with health problems, we really believe that face-to-face coaching, workplace learning, apprenticeships are and will always continue to be the preferred means to develop skills. They help eliminate prejudice, they help build networks, they help overcome barriers, they create opportunities for people in a sustainable manner. So I guess the most important challenge and message we want to give today is in this digital era, we should definitely not abandon one another. We should definitely not abandon learning in the workplace, and we have to properly value face-to-face contact and keep organizing it for people with a disability.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. Some clear points there. I think very complementary to what was said by Fondation ONCE. What we need is of course important to work with employers to make sure that they have the right financial incentives, the right support by job coaches, the right type of programs to help them retain their workforce, retain their staff, and also employ new people, because that will be extremely difficult in the months to come, given the economic context. Particularly interesting was, of course, that you highlighted the need to further publicize, the need to raise awareness about the different, let's say, programs that do exist, both towards the employers, but also the workers, the people with disabilities, and all involved. So some sort of campaign would be extremely useful, I think, there. And of course, everyone's talking about the digital transformation as if it's positive for everyone. But as we've seen in our sector, the digital transformation in the sector in the last year has been in many ways very positive. But in many ways, we've seen the shortcomings of this digital transformation, the lack of face-to-face contact, the fact that there's a digital divide, and all these measures which make it harder for some to participate in different activities, including training. So not abandoning the idea of focusing on learning in the workplace and face-to-face contact, in particular for people with disabilities or other people with support needs, is important there. Thank you for those important points. I will now move to Germany, to Catherine, who maybe she can present her organization, but is basically the German organization of sheltered workshops, and they work to provide work-related measures to people with quite severe learning disabilities in particular, if I understand correctly. So how is the context for you in Germany, and how do you see the employment prospects for people with more severe learning disabilities?
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much to ESPD and also to the Zero Project for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. And also thank you very much to Sigrid, who has already informed us about some aspects who are going on in Germany, especially in sheltered workshops during the first wave of COVID, where most of the sheltered workshops in Germany have been shut down. Luckily, there's a different situation right now during the second wave. What does that mean exactly? Sheltered workshops are open and running. They have elaborated hygiene concepts, and testing of employees and people with disabilities is done on a regular basis. As all of us, I think we are now waiting for the vaccinations to be available, and hopefully all these measures will contribute to improve the situation in hopefully the near future. But yeah, we will see. I think we have to be very patient right now. Sheltered workshops in Germany did not lay off any person with disabilities because of the pandemic. In contrast to the open labor market, people have a legal right to participate in working life through the services of sheltered workshops, meaning they cannot be fired. And also there are no waiting lists. So we have even new people coming in sheltered workshops right now and being provided with the services of sheltered workshops. Luckily also, there has been, during the whole crisis, financial support to the sheltered workshop, the usual financial support, which means they're still open and running. However, as sheltered workshops are social enterprises, the overall economic situation in the next months will have an impact on their economic activities. Workshop users in Germany already receive less remuneration, and their chances of a transition to the open labor market are even worse than before. I think some of you already mentioned why it's extremely difficult right now to find opportunities for work of people with disabilities on the open labor market. Statistics show what I already said. Also, we have comparing January 2020 and January 2021. There are 20,000 more people with disabilities being unemployed right now, which is a huge amount. And not even all people with disabilities are in the statistics in Germany right now. So that's only one part of the large group of people with disabilities in Germany. I think in Germany, it is particularly evident that, for example, inclusive enterprises, which employ a very high proportion of people with disabilities, have problems right now, because many of the businesses have the same problems as businesses, social enterprises in Spain, because they operate in sectors such as restaurants, hotels, and catering, which are particularly affected by the lockdowns. The role of sheltered workshops in the recovery will therefore be to continue what they did before the crisis, offer participation in working life for those who are not or not yet able to work on the open labor market, and at the same time they're having to focus on the further development of their economic activities. Regarding on a more general level, what could we as sheltered workshops, but what could society or even the governments in the different states do to boost the employment prospects of persons with disabilities? There are several means I can think of. For once, as already before the pandemic, employers need much better information and support when they want to employ a person with a disability. In Germany, it is a tedious paperwork to manage to receive aids for workplace adaptation, for personal support, and especially to receive financial means. This is often a never-ending struggle. But as also mentioned before, there are things that have been made very clear through the crisis. People with disabilities need equal access to the possibilities and the chances of digitalization. I think this is the field where they could have the possibility to explore many new opportunities of work and also being employed on the open labor market. But for that, they need to be provided with the financial means to access technology and also training opportunities. I think it is very, very, very important to explain this to politicians, to each and everyone who will be able in the future to support these things. And finally, I think that future labor market policies needs to be even more focused than before on promoting vocational training and the employment of people with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for the overview, highlighting again a lot of that's been said, particularly in terms of the support for employers. The tedious paperwork clearly doesn't help, alongside the difficulties that may arise in that process in any case. So we need to work on that, and then to make sure that everyone can have an equal chance to participate in the digital transformation. But that doesn't come on its own. That comes with investment, that comes with measures that can support people with disabilities and others to make sure that they can really participate and benefit equally to others. So targeted messaging in that is needed. So thank you very much, Catherine, for highlighting those points. I will now move to the ILO, to Switzerland, I still believe, or probably to someone's home now. I don't know where your home is. Jürgen, you work a lot with global businesses regarding the employment of people with disabilities for several years now. What's new, and also what are these businesses asking for in the current context?
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. Indeed, I'm also here in Switzerland, a few kilometers from the International Labour Organization, which is currently under mandatory telework, like many of us around the world. And before giving you a bit of the perspective of the businesses we're working with in the ILO, just a reminder what the latest ILO COVID monitor says, launched. It's a 7th edition, and the latest one was launched last month in January. And there it says that in 2020, so last year, the global labor market has lost an equivalent to 255 million full-time jobs. 255 million full-time jobs were lost throughout last year. And just to put it in perspective, that is approximately 4 times greater than the number of full-time jobs lost during the 2009 financial crisis. And we know that even before the pandemic, almost 2/3 of people with disabilities worldwide, I mean, those of working age, 2/3 of them were not in the labor force. So that means some of them not even actively looking for employment. So this is obviously getting worse during the crisis. Unfortunately, oftentimes don't have the data, like, for example, the ILO General COVID Monitor doesn't disaggregate the data by disability. And that's, of course, something we always push for in the ILO, at least from the disability team, that we need to have more labor market statistics disaggregated by disability, so we really know what the differences, the gaps are when it comes to employment of people without and versus people with disabilities. So moving to the disability perspective, yes, so in the ILO, we provide the technical secretariat to the Global Business and Disability Network. And for those of you who have never heard about it, just a bit of background, it's a worldwide network, as the name suggests. And we have almost 30 global companies there in the network as members, and they operate around the globe. In addition to these global companies, we have more than 30 national business and disability networks in this global network. So these are country level platforms for disability inclusive employers. And then we have 8 international disability organizations as kind of the not-for-profit advisors on disability issues for these companies, including the International Disability Alliance. So specifically on COVID, when the first wave hit most of the world in March, April last year, shortly after, we conducted a survey among our members, specifically the national business and disability networks. As I said, we have 30 of them on board. And 19 of those responded to the survey, and they also forwarded another survey specifically for companies in these countries to find out what the companies have been doing, what they need. And we found that, well, one of the questions we asked was, do you think that your future disability inclusion activities will be negatively affected by COVID-19? And from these 159 companies that responded to the survey, about a third said yes, another third said no, and the last third said we just don't know, it's too early to assess. So as I said, this was at the beginning of the COVID crisis. We don't know, we would have to do another survey to find out what happened ever since. But when we did the survey, we also asked about what were the, let's say, the key measures companies were taking to adjust to the current situation. And we didn't ask whether it was specifically for employees with disabilities or not, because many of the measures that are taken for employees in general are also taken, of course, for people with or workers with disabilities, which might, of course, have some additional support needs. But the top 3 measures companies indicated, and just to mention, these companies also operate in quite a challenging context in developing countries, right? Because these national networks and the companies that belong to these national networks are present in Latin America, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, of course, some also in Europe and the network in the US. But they all said, not all, but sorry, more than 2/3, obviously telework. Whenever it's possible, of course, you send the employees home, including the employees with disabilities. There, of course, it's important to ensure reasonable accommodation, providing the equipment and any adjustments a person with disability might need to be able to work outside the office, usually in home office. But there was a very popular measure, so to say. Then more than half of the companies said, look, flexible working hours we have implemented. And actually 1/3 of the companies that replied said we had to send workers on paid leave for now. These were the responses by the companies. When we asked also the national business and disability networks to which these companies belong, they said, look, we're also trying to provide the companies, and that's also something Katrin, just the speaker before me, said, no, there's a lot of lack on the employer side on actually how to get support. And one of the things the national business and disability networks did, more than 40% of them provided guidance to the companies how they can access government support wherever it existed. As I said, in many developing countries, there might not even be very much of support available, but the national networks try to provide guidance on how to access funds, also to keep workers in general and workers with disabilities employed. One of the questions we also asked was about the business continuity plan. So these are plans businesses usually draft or have in place before a crisis hits, so they know what to do or have a plan in place to address a crisis. There, 122 companies had a business continuity plan, and what was interesting to see that 88% of these business continuity plans had provisions for people with disabilities, workers with disabilities. Obviously, this survey is not representative because we targeted companies that are already employing people with disabilities. So if we would ask such a question, do your business continuity plan include people with disabilities? If that would be a global survey with all companies, obviously the number would be much lower. But there we got 88% of the business continuity plans had measures foreseen to protect the labor rights of workers with disabilities. And then we also asked about the top needs by companies, right? And that's not very much different than pre-crisis. It's a lot of guidance needed on physical, digital accessibility, on how to provide workplace adjustments, reasonable accommodations. There's still a lot of let's say, still clarities lacking on employers. What is this concept actually? What is reasonable accommodation? So this is not different during the crisis. And now with telework, obviously, it sometimes also comes up with that. access to assistive technologies. I mean, one of our colleagues here in the ILO disability team, she comes from Ethiopia, and she said, look, what you're doing here in Switzerland, this wouldn't even work in Ethiopia because we don't have at least the digital infrastructure to do all that adjustments, digital ones. And of course, the general disability awareness in the top management and in co-workers in these companies, knowing what, well, just like addressing the mental barrier that disability still equals inability to work. So this is the first barrier we always have to tackle. And just to say that in the Global Business and Disability Network itself, apart from the survey, we had a number of webinars, one specifically on business leadership, because we know if the top management, if the CEO is committed to disability, that is key. At the same time, it needs to be institutionalized through policies that are effective. And at the end of last year, in November, we also had our regular annual meeting of the Global Business and Disability Network, obviously for the first time virtual. And there we were happy to see that all companies, all the members of the global network committed to the declaration on COVID-19, where they said, look, we were committed and we stay committed and we will be committed to the inclusion of people with disabilities. So having this constant communication and visibility on the importance of including people with disabilities in the workforce is key, and that's also what we're trying to do on a permanent basis here in the Global Business and Disability Network. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jürgen, for that overview of how businesses see issues. Clearly very positive that so many businesses who participate in your network have continuity plans regarding people with disabilities. That's really important, but again, we need that in all businesses, I think. And the focus on to a certain extent quite simple to solve issues such as lack of knowledge on how to get the support. In many countries, the support exists, but most employers aren't aware of it. And so it's quite simple. We just need to promote it better to make sure companies are aware of it and to work on that aspect of things. And that would go and make a big difference. Thank you, Jürgen, for that. And last but not least, you can't have a discussion on the employment of people with disabilities without representatives of people with disabilities themselves.
Thomas, just one remark, please. We have 4 more minutes live streaming, and then the session will end. So we really have to be very, very brief, especially when we want Jim to draw a few concluding remarks.
Okay, thank you, Luke, for that. So Barbara, if you could, within, let's say, 2 minutes or so, give some key messages to employers out there, but also policymakers on what's best for you. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. First, I would just like to highlight that before the coronavirus pandemic, EU figures already indicated that only 50.8% of people with disabilities were in employment, compared to 74.8% of people without disabilities, which shows a quite big disability employment gap of around 25%. So I would try to be quite brief. Several of the points I was going to raise were actually already raised by the previous speakers. So, for instance, the digital gap, promoting accessible vocational training, vocational education and training for people with disabilities, having the right support when the person is employed. So, for instance, providing reasonable accommodation and actually explaining what it means. So, as it was mentioned before, combating discrimination on the ground of disability at workplace. Also recognizing that people working in shelter workshops are actually workers, so they can have the same sort of labor law protection. And also the benefit trap. So to ensure that people with disabilities don't lose their disability benefits when they enter the open labor market. Of course, people with disabilities and their families should be part of the recovery plans, as it was also mentioned before, and disaggregated data by type of disability and gender is also very important. I think I will stop here, so there is some time for
the closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara, for that, highlighting 2 points in particular that hasn't been mentioned. The benefit trap, incredibly important, and then the fight against discrimination is equally very important, on top of the other points you mentioned. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you very much to all the speakers. So we only have 1 or 2 minutes left. So I'll pass the floor to Jim Crow, our president, for some concluding remarks. Jim.
Thank you, dear partners and colleagues. Those presentations from our expert colleagues were all highly informative and highly useful. I'm conscious that by definition, this is a Eurocentric seminar, given that ESPD is a European organization. And I'm conscious that our challenges are equaled, or if not heightened, in other parts of the globe. But nonetheless, I think that there are some indications from our presenters about the actions that we can take wherever we're located. And I shall just march them extremely quickly. The first is, there is a green agenda that most countries need to work to. We need to influence that and ensure employment opportunities for people with disabilities within that area. It's probably going to be the only growth area economically in the coming years. We need to ensure that mainstream labour market initiatives and employment initiatives that are initiated by our states or by our municipalities, we need to ensure that people with disabilities have access to those mainstream programs. It's been emphasized by many of the presenters today about better information to employers about reasonable adjustments and such bureaucratic processes as are available to assist the employment of people with disabilities. And we have to try and look for employment opportunities within the digital divide, to emphasize that the digital divide has to be breached, has to be challenged, and has to be met, including people with disabilities, in providing the solution. So I'd like to thank colleagues again, and thank you, dear participants, for taking part in the live streaming and listening to this seminar. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, dear partners. The debate is not finished. Thank you very much for the contribution. Bye.